It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. The moment a senior Hamas leader hears his sons have been killed in an airstrike in Gaza. It comes as Ramadan draws to a close. The fighting continues, but hopes of a ceasefire fade. Also tonight, the Home Office calls the current asylum system a merry-go-round. We have a special report on one city where hundreds of people who've been refused asylum go under the radar.
They just send letters and ask you if you want to go voluntarily. You need to tell them.
Do you think that's surprising?
Yes, it is.
Children are being let down. A review finds weak evidence to support gender treatment for under 18s, while 5,000 remain on the waiting list. A mother and father sentenced after the murder of their month-old son, who suffered a snapped neck and 10 broken ribs in 2017.
I was not really sure how he even got anywhere, because I didn't even know there was any of the injuries or anything.
President Biden says he's considering a request by Australia to drop the charges against Julian Assange. And a dash for cash, gold medals and athletics to be rewarded with a money prize in the Paris Olympics. Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. 3 sons and 4 grandchildren of a Hamas leader have been killed in Gaza. Ismail Haniyeh is the head of the group's political bureau and is based in Qatar. Haniyeh described his family of martyrs and says he, like many Gaza residents, have paid a heavy price in the war, but insisted that the killing would not affect the ceasefire demands. Well, let's take a look at what is happening with the war in Gaza then. Israel announced its withdrawal from Khan Yunis in southern Gaza on Sunday, saying it is to rest and recuperate forces before an invasion of Rafah. Only one of Israel's brigades remains in the region, securing the Netzarim corridor, which divides the Gaza Strip. Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh has said his 3 sons were killed in an airstrike on the Al-Shati refugee camp. The IDF said its air force attacked 3 military operatives on their way to carry out terrorist activities in the central area of the Strip. And Israel's military could still launch a ground invasion on Rafah, home to more than 1 million Palestinians. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle reports now from Jerusalem as Ramadan comes to an end with Eid.
In East Jerusalem, just before dusk, the Iftar cannon was prepared for the final time this year. The explosion echoed across the city, and Palestinians broke the fast for the last time on one of the most subdued holy months in memory. In Gaza, the fighting continued like any other day over the last 6 months. As Ramadan was drawing to a close, dozens were killed. These children were rushed by ambulance to hospital. Today, the Israeli military confirmed it had killed 3 of Ismail Haniyeh's sons in Gaza City. This is the moment the Hamas leader found out. Haniyeh lives in exile in Doha. He said Israel is deluded if they think that this would put pressure on Hamas to agree a deal. Even in Gaza, amid the darkness of war, the colour and joy of Eid can bring a brief respite from months of fighting. This festival is a moment for families and a time to mark the end of a month of fasting. But in Gaza this Ramadan, families have been torn apart, and the decision to eat or not wasn't always a choice when hundreds of thousands were starving. At this school in Rafah, where hundreds are sheltering, some of the men dressed as clowns to entertain the children.
I do my best to try and bring back their smiles and joy in their hearts.
6 months of war has removed any innocence of youth, but the sight of Bugs Bunny can still bring a smile to a small face. Asha is 12. Her father was killed in the war. This is their first Eid without him.
I lost my dad and I lost my cousin. I wish I could see them. I want to be happy and go back to having joy in our lives.
Fadia fries her children some aubergine slices on a stove outside their small tent. The memory of past Eids are of no comfort now.
We made cake, sweet treats, coffee, and our loved ones would visit. Our happiness was so much more than this. Nothing like this extremely difficult situation.
Yet again, hopes of a ceasefire are fading, and the prospect of more fighting and more killing lies ahead. If Eid has given some in Gaza even a short moment of escapism, a brief chance to forget war, then it is only that, brief.
Well, Alistair joins me now from Jerusalem. Ismail Haniyeh critical to talks, Alistair. Will this strike on his family have an impact?
Well, we don't know officially why the Israeli military decided to target and kill 3 of his sons and extended family members right now. They have admitted doing it, but we don't know why they chose this moment. So the assumption is that it might be connected to the ceasefire talks and an attempt to try and put military pressure on Hamas to agree a deal, because it has always been, for many years, but particularly during this war, the position of Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that military pressure will yield results, particularly when it comes to Hamas. The problem is that's not working right now. Israel has withdrawn all of its forces from southern Gaza, leaving, really, relatively speaking, a very small number left in the Gaza Strip. Under extreme pressure from President Biden and others, Netanyahu has finally relented, and much more aid is getting into Gaza. Not enough still, but much more than it was. And so there are strong rumours doing the rounds here, and what I'm hearing myself, that Hamas is now in a position where it's saying, why should we do a deal right now? Things are actually going in our favour. And so it is perhaps that reason why Israel decided to target Ismail Haniyeh and his extended family. Haniyeh is very important to any negotiations. He's Hamas's leader outside of Gaza. But the most important person, the person who really would have to ultimately agree a ceasefire on the Hamas side, is Yahya Sinwar inside Gaza itself. And he remains on the run. And as far as we know it, Israel don't know where he is.
Alistair, there in Jerusalem. Thank you. Immigration policy has been a key issue for this government, but Sky News has found that more than 50,000 people who were denied asylum status over a decade-long period are recorded as not having left the UK. Our investigation into the asylum system was prompted after it was revealed that Abdul Azidi, an Afghan man who carried out a chemical attack on a woman and 2 children in South London, was twice rejected by the Home Office but remained in the country. As part of our Fault Line series, our communities correspondent Becky Johnson has this report from Hull.
Denied asylum, but they're still here. Many of these people are in the country illegally. Once a week at this church in Hull, they can get basic supplies from a charity.
People come and they can choose 8 items.
And there's high demand.
We've got about 300 people, possibly 400 people now, that are refused asylum seekers that are just surviving, under the radar in this city.
Sakile came from Zimbabwe 18 years ago, but despite having 5 asylum claims rejected, has never been threatened with deportation.
They just send letters and ask you if you want to go voluntarily.
Do you think that's surprising?
Yes, it is surprising.
And she's far from alone. In the decade to 2020, almost 2/3 of people refused asylum were not recorded as having left the UK. That's over 55,000 people. Home for Sakile is a bedsit paid for by a charity. These are the sons she left behind when she came to the UK. She hasn't seen them since. What has that done to you?
Mentally, really, it's disturbed me a lot. I'm not myself.
And yet she stays because she hopes there's still a chance she'll be granted asylum in a system where no is rarely the final answer. When asylum claims are rejected, people can appeal, and appeals are decided in immigration tribunal courts by judges, not the Home Office. Since 2021, just over half of appeals have been successful.
We are a future of Britannia.
At a meeting of asylum seekers in London, we met Ali, who's appealing a refusal. So with the appeal, obviously you're going in front of a judge instead of the Home Office.
Absolutely.
Do you feel that you've got a better chance of success?
I'm so hopeful, yeah.
It was an appeal hearing that granted asylum to the Clapham chemical attacker Abdul Azidi, a convicted sex offender who submitted pictures of his baptism to persuade a judge he converted to Christianity. And we've discovered another case of a convicted sex offender who was allowed to stay in Britain because if he exposed himself in Afghanistan, he'd be at high risk of physical violence. But at the legal firm that represented him, they say it's unfair to blame the courts.
The asylum system is broken. That's the reality of it. Now you've got a government who makes the laws, who runs the system, who makes the decisions, but somehow it's lawyers? I mean, come on.
Labour says it's down to Home Office failings.
If there's such long delays, then you can end up with the system unravelling and being in chaos. Whereas if you have proper early enforcement, which is what should have happened in the Azedi case, then you actually make sure that those returns happen in the first place.
The Home Office says its long-standing policy is that those without a right to stay will be removed. But a government minister admits the system sends people round in circles.
We want to end this sort of merry-go-round of people coming in and advancing more and more grounds. That's why you might look at it differently, and we're determined to clamp down on that through the Illegal Migration Act.
But even if the government succeeds in sending people to Rwanda, thousands of failed asylum seekers won't be eligible because they've already been in Britain so long. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Hull.
Well, Becky joins me now. No one insisting failed asylum seekers leave, it seems, Becky. No ability to work legally, a strange state of stasis for thousands, and a system in disrepair.
Yeah. Tens of thousands of failed asylum seekers still in Britain. As you saw in my report, a sex offender allowed to stay in the country because if he could continue to commit those same offences back home in Afghanistan, he'd be at risk of violence. Everything that we've uncovered paints a really damning picture of the asylum system and indeed the government's failure to get a grip of it over many years. Now, politicians like to talk tough on asylum, we know, and in this election year it's such an important issue because politicians know it matters so much to voters. That's why we hear the tough talk. But voters want to see action, and they've seen precious little, as you've seen from what we've revealed. And that's why the government has invested so much political capital in the Rwanda bill. Now, that's back in Parliament next week. So, you know, we can expect to be reporting on that next week again. But when you've got a Home Office minister admitting to us today that the asylum system is a merry-go-round, you know you've got a problem. And as you saw in my report, the Rwanda plans will only go some small way in dealing with the very large problems that are built up over a long period of time.
Becky, thank you. The government has promised a fundamental change in direction as a result of a landmark review on gender services, which says children are being let down by a lack of research and weak evidence to support medical intervention like puberty blockers. Paediatrician Dr. Hilary Cass published her long-awaited report today in response to concerns from whistleblowers about the care being given to young people seeking gender treatment. Well, the report, which highlighted the exceptional toxicity around the debate, has sparked a review into the use of hormones. Sky's Molly Malone has this report.
Out of the closet! Into the street! It is, as described in today's report, an exceptionally toxic debate about how children questioning their gender should be treated. Political posturing and polarisation, but still people at the centre of it all. One of them, Jack, which isn't his real name, who started seeking gender identity treatment a decade ago. He's now on an adult waiting list for hormone treatment, but wants today's review to change things in the future.
I wish that it had been more open and that it had been more of a safe space where I felt like I could have spoken and been honest with people, and that not felt like I had to prove myself. There are children that have been let down by the service in multiple different ways. What I hope is that with this new service, with the recommendations that Cass is making, that a service can be created that lets less people down.
Dr. Cass's review said children have been let down by remarkably weak evidence on medical interventions, recommending an extremely cautious approach in the future if hormone treatments used to delay the onset of puberty are given before the age of 18. She suggests holistic care needs to be taken when assessing children, and that mental health or neurodevelopmental considerations are made, and says it's possible that a child's social transition, where they use a different name or pronoun, can change the trajectory of their development. It's that language that some in the trans community are worried about.
We have a number of concerns. So some of those are about the way that things are framed very ambiguously and the fact that they are very open to misinterpretation, particularly around areas such as social transition, access to gender-affirming hormones and puberty blockers.
Have you felt that has made a difference?
What has made a difference is the political argument. The report made clear other healthcare services are not discussed or debated like gender treatments. The Prime Minister, though, on a trip today to talk about crime, welcomed the review's recommendations.
It's very much in alignment with our way of thinking, which is to exercise extreme caution on these issues because we simply do not know the long-term consequences and impacts.
The NHS say they've made progress in shutting down the Tavistock Centre, the once centralised clinic for child gender treatment, as it failed to meet standards while referrals soared.
This is not just the Tavistock, this is a whole cultural problem that there's been there. People have been frightened, and that is now changing. The pendulum has swung, and the Cass report gives a huge momentum to that pendulum.
New regional clinics are opening up to replace it, and the NHS has new policies too, on stopping the routine prescription of puberty blockers. But still, the conversation and the criticism will be loud, online and offline. Legal disputes, protest and rows about rights. Molly Malone, Sky News.
The people behind the campaign for sub-postmasters and mistresses wrongly convicted of fraud in the Horizon IT scandal are now known to many of us. One of the lesser-known figures, though, the former Conservative MP Lord Arbuthnot, who supported some of the victims, gave evidence to the Post Office inquiry today. He said the company was more concerned about threats to their business and strung along MPs in a behind-the-scenes deception process. Sky's business correspondent Paul Kelso reports.
James, now Lord Arbuthnot, was the first parliamentary champion of wronged sub-postmasters, believing in their innocence, even as the Post Office insisted they were guilty. Appearing at the public inquiry, he was asked what he would have said had he known then what he knows now.
It would have been that there had been a large number of miscarriages of justice, that the convictions that had been secured by the Post Office were unsafe, and that most, if not all, of the Post Office's convictions of sub-postmasters should be re-examined.
There are 2 other cases in my constituency alone.
Wow, really?
He played a central role, reflected in ITV's recent drama, in persuading the Post Office to commission an independent inquiry into the flawed Horizon computer system by forensic accountant Second Sight, a process he now says the Post Office tried to suppress.
I'm going to ask around the house.
They were worried that Second Sight was getting too close to the truth, and that if they allowed Second Sight to go on uncovering these things, it posed an existential threat to the future of Horizon, and that in turn posed an existential threat to the future of the Post Office.
I think he had 3 others in his constituency, and he basically never let go.
His constituent Joe Hamilton was the first victim to alert him to the scandal.
And how about the experience this week of finally hearing the public inquiry put the case that you've been making for 15 years in the public domain?
I feel a bit sad, actually, if I'm honest, that all those years were wasted where we could have people would have been alive to get their convictions quashed. My parents would have heard me get my conviction quashed. And you just think when people knew, it's sad.
The case against the Post Office has been made. Next, it is the turn of its executives and the politicians who oversaw them to answer the questions that campaigners like James Arbuthnot have been posing for years. Paul Kelso, Sky News at the Post Office inquiry.
The parents of a 1-month-old baby who suffered injuries typically seen in a high-energy car crash have been jailed more than 6 years after his death. Ollie Davis died in October 2017. Today, his father, Michael Davis, was sentenced to at least 22 years in prison for his murder. His mother, Kaylee Driver, was handed a 7-year jail term for causing or allowing his death.
He had 1 month of life, from the 21st of September to the 21st of October 2017. His name was Ollie, and he was betrayed by his parents in the worst possible way. Ollie was found lifeless in this Moses basket at home in Leicester. He had 40 broken bones, including a broken neck. Family members put his distressed cries down to colic and thought he'd died from cot death. When his parents Kaylee Driver and Michael Davis were arrested, both denied knowing what had happened to him.
How do you account for these injuries on Ollie?
I was not really sure how he even got anything, because I didn't even know there was any of the injuries or anything.
Has anyone in that house ever done anything to Ollie that isn't right?
No, actually. I spoke to his mum outside court, and still she couldn't explain it.
I just wondered whether you could tell us what happened to Ollie.
No, I can't, sorry.
You don't know what happened to him?
No.
Driver, who was convicted of causing or allowing Ollie's death, was sentenced to 7 years. Davis will serve a minimum of 22 years in prison for his son's murder.
Due to the amount of injuries Ollie suffered and medical expertise needed to examine those injuries, it has taken more than 6 years for this investigation to come to court and for Ollie's parents to be held accountable.
While they've both been jailed, the judge was satisfied that it was Davis who carried out the attacks. The judge said that Ollie's dad had assaulted him on multiple occasions, that the attacks were brutal and that his mum must have heard his cries, but she put her relationship with him above that of her child. Social services had contact with the family, but a review found that in spite of systemic shortfalls, Ollie's death could not have been foreseen.
This was our worst nightmare. How anybody could hurt a beautiful baby was beyond words. We felt sick to our stomachs, and we have shed many a tear thinking what Ollie went through in his final days.
In the 4 weeks that he was alive, Ollie suffered appallingly. His injuries were likened to that of a car crash victim. His parents start their prison sentences having given no explanation as to why it happened to him. Lisa Dowd, Sky News, Loughborough.
President Biden says he is considering a request to drop America's decade-long attempt to prosecute the Wikileaks founder Julian Assange for publishing US classified documents.
Do you have a response to Australia's request that you end Julian Assange's prosecution?
We're considering it.
Well, our US correspondent James Matthews joins us now from Washington. A realistic prospect, James, do you think, for a man taken to Belmarsh jail 5 years ago today?
Hi, Anna. I think it has to be a prospect, certainly. The US president turns a deaf ear to questions that he doesn't want to answer. For him to respond in a way that was percentage positive creates an expectation, and he will be fully aware of that. It follows Australia's request for the charges to be dropped against Assange, who was born in Australia. He has been charged with 18 violations of US law, including the Espionage Act. It relates to his company, Wikileaks, and his association with the former US soldier Chelsea Manning, and the dissemination of hundreds of thousands of leaked documents related to the wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq. There has for years been a vocal campaign in defence of Assange, claiming that he is a legitimate journalist who was merely pursuing a legitimate practice of gathering news and disseminating it in a way that was entirely appropriate. He was in the Ecuadorian embassy for 7 years, dragged out of there in 2019, and has since been in Belmarsh while there has been this extradition attempt by the United States. That's been gridlocked, held up in the UK courts because the British courts want an assurance from the States that he wouldn't face the death penalty upon any conviction. Things are looking up for him tonight. Indeed, his lawyer is describing today's developments as encouraging.
James, live there in Washington. Thank you. Tonight, Donald Trump has said an Arizona law which criminalises most abortions goes too far and called on Arizona legislators to change it in what appears to be another change of stance for the former US president. Almost all abortions will be banned in Arizona after the US state Supreme Court ruled a Civil War-era law was enforceable. The law, which dates back to the 1860s, allows for no exceptions for rape or incest, but allows abortions if a mother's life is at risk.
Mr. President, did Arizona go too far? Did Arizona go too far?
Yeah, they did, and that'll be straightened out. And as you know, it's all about states' rights. That'll be straightened out. And I'm sure that the governor and everybody else are going to bring it back into reason, and that will be taken care of, I think, very quickly. What do you think?
Police Scotland has received thousands of reports of hate crime offences in the first week of a controversial new law, which was challenged by J.K. Rowling on the day it was introduced. Police said she would not face any action over her comments. And of 7,152 online hate reports between the 1st and the 7th, only 240 have been recorded as hate crimes. Now, an Olympic gold medal has always been regarded as the ultimate honour for sportsmen and women. But this summer, athletics will become the first sport to award prize money to winners at the Paris Games. World Athletics will pay gold medalists $50,000, with relay teams sharing the prize pot in what's been seen as a symbolic break with the amateur past of the Olympics. Sky's Ashna Hurinag reports.
It is seen as one of the greatest sporting achievements, a medal for a moment of perfection and a symbol of national pride. But for this year's Olympians, the dash for gold will be a dash for cash too. Winners of all the athletic events at this year's Paris Games will get a cheque for $50,000. Former champion Lord Sebastian Coe is president of the organisation funding it.
As a raft of funds that we are making available within the sport that may actually allow those athletes to remain in the sport for another 4 years. While we are recipients of broadcast revenue from an Olympic Games, that they are in large part the reason why we are in receipt of that revenue.
48 athletes taking part in Paris stand to benefit.
The idea of winning 50k at the end of the finish line does sound appealing, but it does break with about 128 years of tradition. The International Olympic Committee has never awarded prize money to participants, but this money comes from the athletics governing body, posing the question, even if they can afford it, should they be doing it if others can't?
It's because of this some are critical. For an event designed to celebrate amateur sport and not place monetary value on those taking part, the idea is against the Olympic spirit.
I think it diminishes the value of what sport could represent for society. The values we see, the character traits of resilience and grittiness and brilliance and performing under pressure that are what get played out in sport, so that we really just see it as some kind of financial transaction.
Placing a price on talent rather than appreciating it. The International Olympic Committee told us every day the equivalent of $4.2 million goes to help athletes and sports organisations at all levels around the world. It is up to each international federation and National Olympic Committee to determine how to best serve their athletes and the global development of their sport.
Cash prizes for silver and bronze medalists will start from the 2028 Games. The idea of a win earning you winnings may yet catch on. Ashna Harinag, Sky News.
Extra security was put in place for tonight's Champions League games, which have gone ahead again tonight, despite an Islamic State terror threat. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris is in Paris, outside the Parc des Princes, where Paris Saint-Germain played Barcelona tonight. The stadium also hosting matches, of course, during the Olympics this summer. And was that security evident then, Rob?
Oh, it was very evident. There were armed police with their firearms, very visible for all fans arriving at the stadium, and hundreds of extra police have been drafted in from across the country. There were SWAT teams going round on motorbikes along with riot police, and in the air, drones very visible over the Paris Saint-Germain stadium. But it did all seem to go off peacefully, Paris Saint-Germain losing to Barcelona 3-2. And also in Madrid, the other Champions League match of the night, also seemingly without incident, as Atletico Madrid did beat Borussia Dortmund 2-1. But this is a country, France, on high alert, the maximum alert imposed after the deadly attacks on the concert hall in Moscow just a few weeks ago and claimed by the Islamic State group. It was those purported threats from IS that did lead to this heightened security around Champions League fixtures this week, with France putting in those strengthened measures. And we are seeing this city prepare for the Olympics, and it's led to that increased anxiety about securing those games in the summer. And we've had a sense of that heightened state of alert tonight in the south of the country, in Bordeaux, where police reacted quickly to shoot a man who stabbed to death a person and injured another. That incident, though, is not believed to be linked to terrorism at this stage.
Rob, live for us there in Paris, thank you. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, joined by the Daily Mirror's Associate Editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Mail's Whitehall Editor, Claire Ellicott. Welcome to both of you. Certainly among the stories, we will be discussing this on the front page of The Guardian, with the headline Biden declaring ironclad support for Israel amid fears of an attack by Iran. That and plenty more, of course, when we come back. Well, this is Sky News in just a moment. The press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories. The political leader of Hamas has accused Israel of acting in the spirit of revenge and murder after his 3 children and grandchildren were killed in an airstrike. Sky News has found that more than 50,000 people who were denied asylum status are recorded as not having left the UK over the period of a decade. And a damning report finds there is remarkably weak evidence to support medical gender treatment for children, and many NHS staff are scared to openly discuss transgender issues. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Mail's Whitehall editor, Claire Ellicott. Welcome to both of you. Yep. So as ever, let's check out the front pages then, shall we? Starting with The Guardian, which reports on President Joe Biden calling the US commitment to defending Israel ironclad amid fears of an imminent attack by Iran. The Telegraph leads with Biden's stern warning to Iran not to launch an attack against Israel. The Metro highlights the tragic death of a young woman who was reportedly inhaling 2 or 3 bottles of laughing gas a day. The Times reports that every constituency in Britain had a rise in sickness benefit claims last year, especially in Conservative areas. Meanwhile, the Express's headline, radical NHS plan to fast-track care and free up beds. The Daily Mail reports that thousands of fake stamps are entering Britain from China, leaving victims with £5 fines. The Financial Times reports a dip in market confidence regarding US interest rate cuts as higher inflation exceeds expectations. And The Star claims that 1 in 7 Brits are reusing old tea bags to save money. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. So let's go to Kevin Maguire and Claire Ellicott, who are here. Coverage about this imminent Iranian threat. President Biden's ironclad support for Israel, having overnight said they're making a mistake. Kevin?
Yeah, well, if you're given ironclad support, you can say they made a mistake. Are they going to change? And that's it. And the US is the biggest arms supplier to Israel, actually also to Egypt as well, which has a border which it has shut with Gaza. But yeah, it says intelligence sources are saying there is an imminent attack in retaliation for Israel attacking a diplomatic mission of Iran in Damascus in Syria, because the Israelis have been assassinating people in Syria and also in Lebanon, and that risks spreading the war and gets out of hand. The US will be dragged in. Does Israel then strike back at Iran itself? This is a conflagration that will affect the whole world, both politically, militarily and economically.
And the Financial Times, with a picture there on its front page, shattered spirits, sombre reflection takes place of festivities as Gaza marks the start of Eid, the end of the month-long fast of Ramadan. You know, the difficulties, the picture there of people trying to mark this festival in rubble and ruin, Claire.
Yes, so this should be a time of celebration, and the Wisdom Festival of Ramadan, you fast for a month, and families are meant to come together at Eid. It's a great celebration throughout the Islamic world, and you would normally see people coming together and eating food and celebrating, their families coming from far and wide to celebrate with them. And the events in Gaza have obviously overshadowed the celebration this year. You've got, you can see these beautiful bright prayer mats, and in the background the rubble, the destroyed infrastructure around them. It's a different Eid this year, and for everyone in Gaza and everybody who is also Muslim and is in solidarity with them, it's just a very muted celebration this year. It's not the same as it was.
I live in a bit of East London with a high Bengali population. It was incredible watching families out all dressed up in their finest clothes, as you say, going out to eat. There was a fun fair. It was almost like a carnival, Christmas Day. But it's the indomitable human spirit when you look at this. That is in a smashed mosque. You can see in the picture the minarets have been toppled, and yet there are people praying the way Christians might go to church and sing carols. They're praying. I don't know how they've kept their prayer mats in that condition. They're presumably highly prized, valued, and hidden away. But what's happening in Gaza is absolutely horrific. We can go back to what triggered it on October the 7th in a long conflict, but triggered it with that horrific pogrom by Hamas. 1,200 Israelis killed, more than 250 hostages taken, but it's equally, if not more so now, horrific what the Israelis have done in Gaza with more than 33,000 people killed, the vast majority women and children.
Yeah, killed, brutalised, tortured, you might say, for the Israeli suffering on October the 7th.
No, revenge.
Yeah, and yet on this day, on Eid, the relatives of the political leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, were said to be heading to a refugee camp to see their relatives. 3 of his sons killed. Let's just watch the moment when he found out. Yes, finding out that 3 of his sons had been, martyred was his reaction to that, and his grandchildren as well. He critical to ceasefire discussions which have been taking place in Qatar. He's based in Qatar, and whether this will make a difference, or that Israel said that they attacked terrorist operatives heading towards the central Gaza Strip. But Claire, this is a delicate time, obviously, isn't it?
Of course, and I think a really striking thing about that video that was just shown is he doesn't react at all, and he's just learned that 3 of his sons have died, his grandchildren have died, and there's just absolutely no reaction. And it's I think it's a really key time because they're still trying to negotiate the release of hostages, to negotiate some sort of ceasefire, and he is the key negotiator in this, and he's almost sending a message to Israel that even though he's lost key members of his family, that that's not going to change how he reacts to it.
Yes. People respond to grief differently, but that is he's either incredibly composed, internally he's dying, or he's just so focused on what he does and is absolutely driven. But killing children is wrong, whether it was Hamas and Israelis or Israeli and Palestinians. And his children may be adults, but his grandchildren aren't going to be. And we saw what happened with the aid workers. As Israel says, terrorists, militants, whatever you want to call them, are there, and that's justification for killing people. Well, it's not. It just isn't.
Well, certainly Israeli commentators said that the 3 sons, unknown Hamas operatives, and Israel have said they were terrorists. But in terms of Ismail Haniyeh, The Guardian reported earlier that 60 of his relatives had been killed in the 6-month-old war, including 14 who died after an Israeli airstrike hit the family home back in October. And clearly, hitting the leadership of Hamas is absolutely central to the aims of Israel's war on Gaza, which, as far as they're concerned, continues with a date, we're told, for Rafah.
Well, can you imagine the condemnation that would be deserved if Hamas somehow killed the children and grandchildren of a cabinet minister in Israel? It'd be absolutely wrong, but this is just as wrong.
Let's go to the Times, Claire, shall we? Every constituency in Britain, the paper tells us, had a rise in sickness benefit claims last year, with some of the biggest being recorded in Conservative areas. What's the significance of this?
It's really interesting because the pattern of long-term sickness in the UK, it has always been that people suffer from musculoskeletal diseases. They're bad backs from being hunched over a computer, from doing manual work. And it's now started to shift to mental health problems in the wake of the pandemic. And people have been suffering from long COVID, lots of people suffering from depression and anxiety. And this has really been a marked increase in this. And this story is actually really interesting because it's showing that in Tory areas, which traditionally are more leafy, they're more middle class, and Labour tend to dominate big towns where you have a different spread of people, that the sickness claims are going up. So people are claiming benefits because they can't work because they're long-term sick. And they're actually attributing this to mental health. And they're saying that it's been cited in 69% of cases, according to official figures. So it is really interesting. And I think in the wake of the pandemic, it has been a real theme.
But also mental health services, we know, are part of the difficult squeeze on the NHS. And as we know, waiting lists for those who are not mental health and are waiting for treatment, they may not be getting the treatment they need.
No, absolutely. I'm sure that's probably happening in Tonbridge, Basingstoke, South Cambridge and Buckingham, which are four of the areas where proportionately, the traditionally Tory areas, where the proportionate increase is bigger than elsewhere. But politically, bashing benefit claimants, welfare scroungers, has been the theme of a tune sung by some Tories. Now, can they do that anymore when it is their voters who are actually now claiming benefits and fueling the increase? I suspect they can't, because, of course, the IMF is saying benefits should be cut.
OK.
Let's see if they're going to do it. I bet they're not.
Well, plenty more in the next part of our programme as well. More from the front pages, including this in the Times too. Its headline, Gender Clinics in Ministers' Sites After Refusing to Share Their Data. A continuing fascinating story. Back with that in just a moment.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place for news.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Claire. With me now, Kevin McGuire and Claire Ellicott. She's trying to read a story. It's not fair to tell her off, is it, really? But anyway...
I don't know. I mean, it's like a SWAT. I won't say...
to read the papers, goodness me.
I won't take a Boris Johnson line and call you a girly SWAT. I'll just call you a SWAT.
Right, let's go to the Times. Gender clinics in minister sites after refusing to share data. This was a considerable number of them, wasn't it, Claire?
Yes, 6 out of 7, according to this report. And the Health Secretary, Victoria Adkins, has now spoken to the head of the NHS to talk about overhauling some of these services because they've refused to supply the data that they needed to talk for a review. And Hilary Cass has obviously done this really quite groundbreaking report into gender services offered in the UK. And they're now going to be looking at adult services. And there's just been huge concern about all of this. This is one of the first times, anywhere in the world they've had really a landmark review into what this all means for some of the people who've gone through the services. And to say that a number of NHS clinics haven't supplied the data that is needed, with all the controversy around the Tavistock clinic, which has had to close, it's a really compelling case.
It's appalling, actually. If 6 out of 7 NHS adult gender clinics thwarted, as Hilary Cass says, her investigation, not cooperating with the University of York, which is very good on health economics, that was doing the investigation. The Telegraphs say the Tavistock clinic won't give what happened to 9,000 trans children.
Well, this is in the
who
Telegraph,
passed through,
isn't it? Yeah, so 9,000 went through Tavistock.
The facts, the facts to find the evidence, to find out what really happened. And it's where I think Cass scores. She seems 4 years, seems to have looked at it very thoroughly and with this degree of objectivity, while in this argument, which is, she admitted it is so polarised and toxic at times, you have like two sides, almost like in a First World War battle, just firing shells at each other and demonising each other, and it's kind of pretty horrific.
Yeah, and people receiving NHS treatment without people feeling that they could ask the questions about whether or not it was appropriate.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, there's 5,000 people still waiting to be seen, still on waiting list to get treatment in this sort of period of trying to work out what treatment they're going to get, aren't they? And this review of adult services now, which the Times talks about, adult NHS gender services face being overhauled amid mounting anger from ministers over their completely unacceptable refusal to participate in this research. We wait more on this, I think, probably, don't we? Let's go to the front page of the Daily Mail. Claire, your paper. Thousands of fake stamps, is this postal stamps, are entering Britain from China.
Yes, so it's an extraordinary story. Apparently there's all these fake stamps being brought in from China. They're being, I think Royal Mail have contracts with big companies to sell them blocks of, stamps. But for smaller companies, they don't have to buy through the Royal Mail. And some of these are apparently all fake. And people are having to pay £5 penalties to collect their post. It's quite extraordinary. And I think some experts have called it economic warfare, which is quite extraordinary. But it is...
But it's not, in a way, it's not China, though. It's not the Chinese government. It's people in China, just as you get scam calls from all over the place. It's not Fu Manchu doing this, is it? It's sort of bringing up demons all the time. It's got to be tackled. But I suppose the way you investigate it is somebody's bought some stamps from a shop and they've put them on a letter, it's gone, and then whoever they sent it to has to pay a £5. Take it back to the shop. Where did you get your stamps from? You can only buy them from the post office, I imagine.
Very interesting.
Despite all its terrible behaviour to Mr Bates and the others, it's...
Separate story, yeah, exactly. Quick look at The Guardian. Very much the end of the amateur era, it feels, does it not? If you're going to get prize money in athletics for winning a gold medal at the Paris Olympics.
This feels a bit overdue, doesn't it? They've changed the rules so that athletes who win gold medals will get $50,000. And in my view, great. These people deserve money. And also, for years we've been hearing about sports like heptathlons and javelin and things like that. They're not really rewarded they're not really rewarded properly in schools.
You make a fortune after you've won.
But they're not.
You're not going to run. You're not going to run faster. I think. Oh, I really want to win the 100 metres now.
Got to go to the weather. Got to go to the weather. More from both of you later, Claire and Kevin. Thank you very much indeed. See you in the 11. Here's the weather. So the rest of the week looks unsettled, I'm afraid, would you believe, again with further wind and rain. Southern parts, though, will be drier over the weekend. A mild but quite windy start tomorrow, misty low cloud, hill and coastal fog over much of southern Britain and the southeast of Ireland. Far south can expect a little patchy rain or drizzle too. So our press preview continues in Sky News at 11. Hamas claims 3 sons and some grandchildren of one of its political leaders have been killed in an Israeli airstrike. Taking a look at that and the rest of the news.